The auditorium lights dimmed as politician, diplomat, and First Lady Hillary Clinton walked on stage, her expression calm, almost rehearsed. It was the National Civic Unity Summit in Washington, a stage meant for healing words and hopeful rhetoric. The crowd applauded politely, a mix of press, academics, church leaders, and young political operatives. But as Hillary opened with, "We've come here today to talk about unity in divided times." Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't clap. He didn't blink. He was sitting 3 rows back, arms crossed, spine straight, eyes locked. Because Joel hadn't forgotten. He hadn't forgotten the fire-blackened doors of St. Mark's in Minneapolis, the burned pews in Kenosha, the shattered stained glass in Philadelphia. He remembered the silence that followed, not from the media, not from the activists, but from Hillary herself, the politician who had, by her silence or carefully worded statements, seemed to condone unrest even as churches were set ablaze. And now here she was standing under a banner that read, "Unity like the past had just evaporated." Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen leaned forward in his chair. His clerical collar was visible under his suit jacket, but he didn't come as a mere attendee today. He came as a witness, a man of God, and a citizen who'd watched his country's sacred spaces burned while those in power smiled and shrugged. Hillary's tone softened. "We must listen to each other, even when it's difficult, especially then." Cameras clicked, heads nodded. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stood up. No microphone, no invitation, just his voice. "Did you listen when they torched the churches?" he asked loud enough for the room to shift. "Did you call for calm then? Or did you offer excuses for those who lit the fires?" Every head turned. Politician, diplomat, and First Lady Hillary Clinton paused. For the first time, her speech seemed to catch in her throat. She hadn't expected this, not from the audience, and certainly not from pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen. "Security," someone muttered near the edge of the stage, but pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen kept going. "You permitted the destruction of our sacred spaces, and now you speak of unity. You don't get to stand by as the house burns and then offer empty promises. Not to us, not to this nation." The room wasn't clapping anymore. Phones were up recording. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't yell. He didn't need to. The fire was already in his words. Hillary stepped back slightly, just half a pace, enough to show the impact, enough for the nation to feel it. And pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen, he didn't sit back down. He took one slow step forward. He was just getting started. The silence in the auditorium wasn't empty. It was electric. You could hear zippers, camera shutters, the creak of someone shifting in a chair. But nobody dared interrupt what was unfolding. It wasn't just a moment, it was a collision. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen took another step toward the front. His steps resonated on the marble floor, deliberate, defiant. The stage was now in reach. Politician, diplomat, and First Lady Hillary Clinton was still standing at the podium, but she wasn't speaking. Her hands clutched the sides like she needed it to hold her up. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's voice sliced through the tension again. "You stood by when mobs desecrated houses of worship. You rationalized it as righteous anger. You made light of the devastation on national platforms while priests swept up ashes with their bare hands." Gasps rippled. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's words weren't just sharp, they were surgical. Every sentence cut through the carefully constructed narrative politician, diplomat, and First Lady Hillary Clinton had built. Every phrase stripped away the political poetry and revealed something raw underneath. Hillary raised a hand, perhaps to respond, perhaps just to steady herself. But pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't pause. You remained silent when they spat upon scripture, when they mocked the faithful, when the pews lay empty, not from lack of devotion, but because the very doors of sanctuary had been shattered and torched. Behind him, someone whispered, "Is this part of the program?" It wasn't. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't care. "I'm here for the people whose voices were drowned out by bricks and fire, while you acknowledged it as a form of expression." Hillary finally spoke, her tone clipped. This summit was meant for reconciliation. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen cut in calm but cold. Reconciliation starts with repentance. The crowd stirred. That line didn't just hang in the air. It landed like a hammer. A few audience members began clapping. Just a few, but then it grew. Not a standing ovation, not yet, but enough to make Hillary's eyes flick nervously toward the exit stage left. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen turned to face the room. You desire unity? Begin by acknowledging your complicity in the burning of our sacred spaces. Phones kept rolling. Hashtags were already trending. He wasn't asking questions anymore. He was drawing a line, and the country was watching. Politician, diplomat, and First Lady Hillary Clinton had worn the same expression for years. Polished, resilient, rehearsed. But as pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stood between her and the crowd, that expression began to tremble. Not dramatically, just enough for anyone watching closely to realize the politician, diplomat, and First Lady wasn't in control anymore. She reached for the mic again, forcing a practiced smile. Joel, this isn't the place for such accusations. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly and raised his voice, not in anger, but clarity. You think truth has a place? It has every place, especially here, especially now. The crowd shifted. Some were uncomfortable. Others were riveted. One young pastor in the second row mouthed, "Amen," under his breath. A woman clutched a cross pendant around her neck. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stepped closer to the podium, not to take it, but to stand beside it. Equal ground, equal voice. You invited cameras. You invited spiritual leaders. You spoke of healing, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen continued. But when the flames were real and the pastors were pleading for help, you seemed more concerned with political appearances. A murmur of tension ran through the room, the kind that made networks lean forward in their broadcast booths. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen paused, then spoke softer, and somehow it hit harder. My spiritual brethren across this nation saw their churches vandalized, pews overturned, Bibles ripped, and all we heard from Washington was silence. Hillary's eyes widened for a split second. She hadn't prepared for this. Not one word, not one visit, not one apology. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen looked directly at her. Do you even recall their pleas? The ones who tried to shield their altars with their own bodies? Hillary's jaw clenched. The teleprompter was still rolling, but no one cared about the prepared speech anymore. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen wasn't reading from a script. He was reading from scars, and the audience could feel it. He turned back to the room, fire in his voice. Now you permitted the burning of our sacred spaces, and now you speak of tolerance. You don't get to hide behind that word any longer. A standing ovation didn't erupt, not yet, but people were standing, one row at a time, and Hillary's hands slowly fell from the mic. The silence after pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's words wasn't awkward. It was electric. Every second of it pulsed like a drum beat. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stood still, his graying hair catching the sanctuary lights, the cross around his neck visible, glinting like a challenge. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need theatrics. Truth had already detonated in the room, and the aftershock was still rattling hearts. A man in the third row rose slowly. No applause, just reverence. Then two more stood behind him. Then the choir, one by one, rose from their seats, not singing, not swaying, but simply standing in solidarity. Hillary tried to gather herself. Her staff in the back exchanged panicked glances. The communications director touched her earpiece and whispered, "We need to pivot now." But there was no pivoting out of this. Hillary stepped toward the mic, her voice thinner than usual. "We came here to unite, not to foster division." Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen turned, eyes calm but unrelenting. "Then why did you remain silent when the divisions were real, when pastors were assaulted and stained glass windows shattered?" Hillary's smile cracked again, and this time she didn't recover. "You were swift to act on certain causes," pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen said, now facing politician, diplomat, and First Lady Hillary Clinton directly. "But when churches burned, you seemed more concerned with carefully worded statements than with genuine outcry." Murmurs turned to gasps. Some in the press pool lowered their cameras, not because they weren't recording, but because they suddenly realized they were witnessing something, not just covering it, a spiritual war unfolding live. Hillary gripped the podium. I won't be lectured by someone who, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't even let her finish. He stepped forward and raised his voice, crystal clear. You don't get to lead this nation in spiritual healing after staying silent while our churches turned to ash. It wasn't a shout, it was a strike. A woman in the back sobbed softly, and then came the sound Hillary feared most. Clapping, slow, rhythmic, not for the office of the politician, diplomat, and first lady, but for the man who had stood with no title, no invitation, no script, and still spoke with more authority than anyone in the room. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just stepped back from the mic, eyes locked on Hillary, message delivered. And the crowd, they weren't divided anymore. They had chosen. Hillary tried to move on. She shuffled her notes, smiled mechanically, and began reading off a pre-approved statement about national healing and moving forward. But no one was listening. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen hadn't just interrupted the service. He had rewritten it. Every word Hillary spoke now sounded like noise, like background static behind a signal that had already pierced through. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stood off to the side, not speaking, not posturing, just watching. But it was his silence now that roared through the pews. A pastor, mid-aisle, closed his Bible and placed it on the bench beside him. A woman with 2 kids whispered, "That's who should be up there." The cameras, still rolling, weren't zoomed on Hillary anymore. They panned to pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen. The networks had smelled blood, and they knew where the real story was. Hillary's voice faltered. She looked up, clearly aware of the power shift, and tried again. "We must reject division, no matter where it comes from." Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stepped forward again, not waiting for an invitation. If you genuinely sought unity, you would have condemned the mobs that burned down sanctuaries. You would have defended pastors instead of rationalizing their persecutors. You don't get to talk about unity after betraying the faithful. The audience didn't clap this time. They rose, dozens, maybe more. A wave of people standing, not for applause, but in defiance, in recognition of something real. Hillary froze, her words caught in her throat. And pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen pointed gently to the stained glass behind her. A shattered corner, still unrepaired from last year's riot. "Your silence permitted that destruction," he said. "And now you seek to instruct us." It wasn't merely political anymore. It was personal. A wound on the soul of the faithful. A cameraman whispered, "This isn't a speech. It's a reckoning." And Hillary knew God. She reached for her mic, but her hand trembled. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't need another line. He had already spoken the one truth that couldn't be dodged. You let them burn what was sacred, and now you dare to speak of peace. There was no going back. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice had the calm power of someone who'd waited patiently for the mic, only to realize the silence had become deafening. He stepped forward, eyes locked on Hillary, his steps echoing across the wooden floor like a countdown. "I came here with respect," Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen began, his tone measured, steady. "I came because I believe this place deserved truth, but what I'm seeing is not unity. It's selective memory, and I haven't forgotten." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Hillary blinked slowly, like she hadn't expected anyone to challenge the script, like she still believed her experience and stature would shield her. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen raised a printed photo blown up in stark black and white. A burnt church, the frame melted, watches where a Bible used to be. This was June 2020. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen said, "You spoke of justice while this burned. You declared silence was violence. So where were your words when they desecrated holy ground?" Hillary's lips tightened, but no sound came. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen took a step closer. "You want America to forget, but I remember the pastors who stood in rubble, the families who found their pews charred, the crosses that collapsed." He lifted another photo, a child standing barefoot in debris, clutching a melted rosary. "You called it unfortunate. You said nothing that day, not even a whisper." The room grew tense. No one clapped. No one moved. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen turned to the crowd now, not just Hillary. "They tell us we're the problem, that our faith is outdated, But when our churches burned, they didn't mourn. They branded it progress. Hillary tried to speak, tried to raise her hand, but pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen cut straight through the air. You had every camera, every microphone, every press release, but you displayed no conviction in defense of the faithful. And now you seek to preach unity. He paused. This isn't unity, it's surrender dressed up in slogans. It's rewriting the past to fit your narrative, and I refuse. A man in the crowd, older, gray-haired, stood up silently. He placed his hand over his heart. Then another, then another. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's voice softened. You may have occupied the highest offices, but you abandoned the house of God, and I won't let you turn prayer into a political punchline. The podium no longer belonged to Hillary. It belonged to the people. And pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen had become their voice. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't step back from the podium. He gripped it tighter. You didn't just stay silent, Hillary. You stood by while they spat on everything millions of Americans hold sacred. His voice cracked, not with weakness, but with the rage of someone who had held it in far too long. I remember when they stormed St. John's with spray paint and Molotov cocktails. You offered platitudes, Hillary. You said pain has a voice. But when that pain came from Christians watching their sanctuaries burn, you heard nothing. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen turned the pages of a folder. Photos, tweets, footage, timelines. I watched you engage in performative gestures for political theater, but I never saw you step into a burnt church in Mississippi or sit with a black pastor who lost everything in Minneapolis. He raised a photo of a Bible singed and left open on the floor, ashes covering the Gospel of John. This isn't about politics anymore. This is about what you let happen to the soul of this country. Hillary's arms folded tightly across her chest. Her team exchanged glances. Cameras were still rolling. Live streams were still counting up. Hundreds of thousands now. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's tone dropped low, piercing. You let them call believers bigots. You let them paint crosses in flames and call it resistance. And now you stand behind a podium asking for healing. A young woman in the front row wiped a tear. An older veteran beside her nodded slowly, fists clenched. You want unity, politician, diplomat, and First Lady Hillary Clinton? Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen said, stepping around the podium and facing her directly. Then why'd you abandon us when it cost you nothing to stand up? Why'd you let churches be trampled while you smiled for Vanity Fair? Silence. You let mobs mock Christ, vandalize prayer circles, and torch altars while you lectured us about morality. His hand trembled now as he held up one final photo. Charlie Kirk kneeling in front of a vandalized church, holding a Bible to his chest with tear-streaked cheeks. You told America he was divisive, but he was the one who stayed while you ran. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's voice cracked again. This time not from fury, but from something deeper. He stayed. We stayed while you looked away. He turned back to the crowd. I don't need your unity, Hillary. I've got faith. And it didn't burn with those pews. It rose. And that was the moment, clear as day, when even politician, diplomat, and First Lady Hillary Clinton knew she had lost the room. Politician, diplomat, and First Lady Hillary Clinton blinked once, then again. Her staff shifted behind her, whispering into earpieces. She stepped forward to reclaim the mic, but pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't budge. The crowd wasn't looking at the politician, diplomat, and First Lady anymore. All eyes were locked on the man who had just brought the room to its knees. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen turned slowly, his voice now calm, unsettlingly calm. You think this is politics? He said. You think I came here to score points? He pointed to the charred photo again. Charlie in front of a ruined church, his hands still clasped in prayer. He wasn't trying to trend. He was trying to save what you let die. Hillary finally spoke low and measured. Pastor Osteen, you're weaponizing grief. This is not the forum for such rhetoric. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen cut her off. This is the forum because you sure didn't want one when it was our grief. A few gasps echoed in the back. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen took a breath. His hands were steady now. He looked right into the lens of the main broadcast camera and spoke to the American people. I don't stand here as a political operative. I stand here as a man of God who watched his community rebuild churches from ashes while you attended galas and spoke of abstract concepts like equity. He stepped forward. No notes, no script. You let them deface crucifixes and call it justice. You let them storm sanctuaries and call it protest. And when we asked for help, you gave us hashtags. Hillary's eyes narrowed. You're distorting the facts. No, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen said, I'm remembering. He turned to the screen behind him. Photos flicked one after another. St. John's, Minneapolis, Kenosha, Portland, graffiti across altars, statues of saints shattered, firebombs in the choir loft. You weren't silent because you couldn't speak. You were silent because you didn't care. The crowd murmured louder now, boiling. A mother in the third row clutched a rosary. A retired firefighter stood to his feet. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen raised his hand. I don't want your apology. I don't want your unity tour. I want accountability. He turned back to Hillary. You didn't just watch churches burn. You watched faith burn. You watched trust in this country burn. His voice dropped. But it wasn't the cross that crumbled. It was your legacy. Hillary's lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Charlie believed this nation still had a soul. You called him dangerous. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen lifted a worn Bible from his bag. He held it up, his knuckles white with conviction. This didn't burn in the riots. It didn't burn when the media mocked it. It didn't burn when your allies spit on it. Then he turned slowly toward the crowd. You want to know what burned? He pointed right at Hillary. You did. Your credibility, your connection to the people, your right to speak on unity ever again. The audience stood one by one, not chanting, not cheering, just standing in reverent silence. A new authority had entered the room, and it wasn't the one with the title politician, diplomat, and first lady. Hillary didn't speak. She didn't move. Her polished expression cracked, not with anger, but with something far worse for a politician on live television. Doubt. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stepped down from the riser and walked to the front of the stage. There was no teleprompter, no advisor whispering in his ear, just the crowd and the silence they were letting stretch into judgment. You keep saying we need to heal, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen said, his voice low now, cutting through the tension like a blade. But healing doesn't start with press releases. He pointed behind him where politician, diplomat, and First Lady Hillary Clinton stood, arms now crossed tight, defensive, not dignified. Healing starts when you stop lying about who struck the match. A voice from the back shouted, "Preach!" Another, "Say it louder!" But pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't feed the fire. He held his ground. Hillary, he said, using her first name the way millions of Americans do when they feel like their leaders have become strangers. You didn't just ignore us, you used us. Gasps. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't blink. You told middle America that their prayers were outdated, that their traditions were inconvenient, that their pain wasn't headline-worthy unless it fit your narrative. He walked toward the edge of the stage. You blamed small-town churches for division while you associated with the activists who looted them. You told victims to be patient while their towns were turned into kindling. You told us the fire was our fault. He stopped, looked straight into Hillary's eyes. You didn't lose the people. You abandoned them. Hillary's jaw tightened, but her voice didn't come. Behind her, aides stood frozen, waiting for a signal. It never came. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen looked out across the audience. Veterans in their Sunday best, mothers with children on their laps, pastors with folded arms. This isn't about left or right, he said. It's about right and wrong. Then he turned to the cameras again, millions watching. America was never perfect, but we had something sacred. A promise that if you believed in something higher than yourself, this country would defend your right to worship, to speak, to live free. He held up the scorched photo of Charlie once more. He believed that promise. You broke it. For a moment, no one breathed. Then a slow clap. It started from a soldier in the second row, then a nurse, then an elderly couple holding hands, and then the entire room. Hillary looked left, then right, but the applause wasn't for her. It was for the man with the Bible, the photo, and the fire no riot could burn away. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't smile. He simply nodded. One battle down, one reckoning to go. The clapping didn't fade. It roared, not like a stadium ovation, but like something older, more primal. a sound born not of entertainment but of recognition. The sound of people who had waited years, some decades, for someone to finally say out loud what they'd been forced to whisper in private. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stepped back. He didn't cry. He didn't gloat. He simply stood with the image of Charlie still in his hand and a small Bible still peeking from his jacket pocket. He glanced once more at Hillary, and Hillary, for the first time in the entire event, took a step back, not physically but politically, morally, emotionally, because the cameras were no longer on her. The narrative was no longer hers. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's mic was off, but that didn't matter anymore. His voice had already reached far beyond that room. It was on 1,000 live streams. It was clipped and posted. It was racing through Twitter, TikTok, True Social, Facebook, Telegram, everywhere. People still cared about what was real. And what was real was this: the politician, diplomat, and First Lady of the United States had stood frozen while a man of God, backed by no power except truth and pain, spoke for millions. Outside, protesters began to quiet. Inside, even the Secret Service seemed unsure whether to step in. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen took one final breath, then faced the audience. "I don't hate her," he said, motioning toward Hillary. "I just wish she loved this country more than her image." Gasps again, but this time it wasn't scandalous. It was human. She had the chance to unite us. She chose division. She had the stage. She chose silence. She had the power. She chose fear. He held up Charlie's picture one last time. "But we still have each other, and that means we still have America." He handed the photo to an elderly veteran in the front row, a man who wore his medals not for display, but because they meant something. He clutched it to his chest and nodded. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen looked to the press, knowing they'd twist every word he said. Then he gave them the only line they couldn't spin. Unity doesn't come from a podium. It comes from truth. And you can cut mics, but you can't cut conviction. With that, he stepped down. No security, no entourage, just his boots on the floor and his shadow long behind him. The doors opened. People followed, not because he asked, but because he'd earned it. And back on stage, Hillary stood alone, surrounded by power, but devoid of respect. In that moment, the world didn't just hear the difference between a politician and a man of God. They saw it. They tried to silence him. They tried to shut down the truth. But pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't flinch. He stood tall, even as they cut his mic, rolled their eyes, and turned their backs. Because he wasn't speaking for himself. He was speaking for the millions who watched their churches burn while politicians stayed silent. For the veterans forgotten, the families mocked, the faith dismissed, and he didn't need permission to speak. He needed only conviction. Hillary preached unity from a script. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen spoke it from his scars. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was a reckoning. And when history looks back, it won't remember the silence from the podium. It'll remember the voice that rose anyway. If you found this breakdown insightful and want to see more powerful political and cultural analysis like this, please do us a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next fight for truth.